Hi, today I want to talk to you about suspension. It happens a lot if you do track days or drifting with a car that you'll find out that the suspension is not sufficient. The car moves around too much, it doesn't communicate so well with the driver, and often you'll have failures like a shock that explodes or a spring that breaks or a top mount failure or something like that. So it's always a good investment to go with a coilover setup. In this case we have a BC Racing strut, a so-called coilover. It comes as a complete assembly, so you have the shock, the spring and the top mount. In this case it has a 10 kilo spring, which I think is a good setup point for the front of a BMW. If you have a lightweight car or you have an aluminum engine like a 328, you might go for a little lighter like a 9 or 8 kilo, but generally speaking 10 kilos is a pretty good mark for the front of a BMW. In this case it's also an adjustable strut, so if you move it clockwise it becomes harder. If you move it counterclockwise, the suspension becomes more soft. So the inbound and the rebound are linked to each other. There's also more high-end kits where you have the inbound and the rebound set up separately, and you also have the high and low speed setting and all that stuff. But in this case, for this amount of money, I think this is quite a good setup. BC has the adjustment on the coil, because this is a full coil setup. You can loosen this collar and you can move this piece around, which changes the total height of the assembly, and in that way you can change the ride height of your car, which I think is a really good system. What you see a lot on the more budget shocks is that you have to give the spring more or less compression to change the ride height of the car, and this is very preferable. If you take a look at the top mount, it's actually quite durable. This is the starting point in quality for BC. You can get more high-end kits as well. It's very important to also upgrade the top mount for two reasons. One of them is that an aftermarket suspension does not fit the diameter, the hole of the top mount of an original car. So in that way you cannot even use them, and even if you would be able to adapt them, the original top mount is way too weak, because a factory car may have a 6 or a 7 kilo spring or even weaker. In this case you go to a 10 kilo spring. It's also a cylindrical shape, where you often see that the spring of a road car is a bit more like an ellipse, and that means that the force of the spring, which is narrow in diameter, focuses on the inside of the top mount much more rather than on the outside with a factory spring. So you're concentrating those extra kilos that you have on the spring on the top mount, so a factory top mount is ultimately going to fail. So don't forget to upgrade the top mounts if you get a coilover setup. Also in the rear, it's a very common failure that we see that people put strong shocks on the car and they really like it, but they use the factory top mounts in the rear, and at the end of the race the ingoing rod of the suspension is sticking out simply because the whole assembly has been way too weak to accommodate the shock. So that's basically how that works, and we've been using these for years. We're quite happy with them. I think the price starts at around 800 euros and goes all the way up to 2500 for their more high-end sets. But like I said, I think this is a really good investment. If you crash your car, they usually survive, so you can take them to the next car, provided that you use the same chassis, of course. So I think this is one of the first things you should do. It makes drifting and track days a lot easier. Actually, my brother has them on his track day car, and the car was really transformed after we put them on. It was so much easier to drive in the wet, in the dry. It's really just a good investment. So I hope you learned a little bit from that, and thank you for watching.